Welcome to another episode of The Dissection. I had a debate with a member of Afriforum about affirmative action. This debate happened a while ago, but I think it's still important to introduce to people who may not have seen it. And as the channel has grown, some of you may not have seen this content before. And if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, welcome. Please consider subscribing. 77% of the people watching these videos haven't yet subscribed. Helps users find the channel. It helps us spread the word, spread knowledge, spread enlightenment, spread light. So take an opportunity right now, just click subscribe, like the video, and then put a comment as well. If you're watching live, if you're watching the premiere, I appreciate you. Thank you so much. So here is the debate and how everything went down. It was a part of a longer debate, but what I did is I truncated everything that was relevant to the discussion around affirmative action, because we did touch on other points with other panelists that were not relevant to that particular discussion. So for crystallization, I put it together in this way. Having said that, here's the debate.
That we got actually from the Afriforum representative are reflective of that, because he says, listen, affirmative action policies are discriminatory in the way that the apartheid regime was. So he's implying that BBBEE and other policies are bad policies in principle. And actually that speaks to challenging the idea of social justice, challenging trying to fix the wrongs of apartheid. Because if we think about why did we actually choose these policies of affirmative action in BBBEE, it was to redress the exclusion of people on the basis of the race. So you can't say that the redress is equivalent morally to the offense at the onset.
Mr. Van Zyl, why are you equating affirmative action, BBBEE, the redress of past imbalances, to apartheid?
Well, firstly, what was copy and pasted, what I said, was the racial categorization of whites and black. You take all the South Africa as a country of Zulus, Chongas, Vendas, Afrikaners, and then you just put them into these racial categories that the apartheid regime created of white and black. And then that's the thing that I was saying was copy and pasted. The ANC thought that was a very good idea from the previous regime. To answer the question of equating what's happening today with the past, it's rather a question of principle, and Mr. Jamie touched on that. Can we not agree that racial discrimination and racially discriminatory laws are wrong in principle? I mean, the theme of this conversation is about social cohesion. Now, racial discrimination destroys social cohesion in every arena, in sport, in the workplace. It others people. It puts people into boxes.
What is it?
Into racial categories thought of by the previous regime.
What is it about the categorization of people into racial groups to address the past? Because if you remember, apartheid used job reservation as well to promote jobs for white South Africans, particularly Afrikaner white South Africans. That's the past we've had. But what is it about it that in you is wrong in terms of saying, let's try and redress this balance and say, how many black people would we need in certain positions, and let's affirm them in that position? What's wrong with that? What's the principle for you that is wrong?
It is wrong because you are stereotyping an entire race rather than looking at it at a case-by-case basis. Is this the son of a rich carder, or is this the son of a person that grew up in a shack in the township? That's a very big difference. And under these blanket laws of white and black, and basing laws on these racial categories that were thought up by the previous regime, you are giving assistance to people that don't need it, while rejecting others that do need it, rather than going on a case-by-case basis. Like I said, when you're taking a blanket statement or a blanket categorization and stereotype of an entire race, then you are pretty much giving, you are trying to solve problems that aren't there sometimes. For example, the son of a rich politician, if they are black, will get benefits from racially discriminatory laws, while the son of a poor, unemployed white South African that grew up in a house that was unemployed and poor will then be discriminated against. That's the problem, because that's the problem that inevitably results when we can't agree that racial stereotyping and racial discrimination is wrong in principle.
I mean, you are hearing the explanation by Mr. Van Zyl saying this is why he thinks the principle of categorizing according to race is principally wrong, because you could end up even discriminating against somebody who deserves to get a chance.
Well, first and foremost, I don't think that you can make policy on a case-by-case basis. You have to look at the general trends, which is why you have office like Stats SA. And I think we need to be cautious when we talk about social redress, because we are talking about social justice. And the social justice that the ANC hasn't done a great job, but the ongoing social justice is exactly what is creating the lack of cohesion. Because on one side, people are saying you're discriminating against us because we used to enjoy this thing exclusively, and now you're bringing in other people into the room. There are no incentives for boardrooms to diversify. There are no incentives for private schools to diversify. There are no incentives for affluent neighborhoods to diversify, which is why you have to use policy to create those kind of mandates, right? But it's not discrimination to do so. When we build a wheelchair ramp in the building, we're not discriminating against the able-bodied. We're creating an equitable and accessible workplace. And we need to be very cautious when people push back towards some of these social programs by arguing that they are exceptions to the rule. We know that they are exceptions to the rule. We know that there are rich children who go to St. John's who are black. But in the main, there is still a necessity for people to be given access to universities, to different boardrooms and opportunities that they wouldn't get otherwise.
What's your view about the criticism of BBBEE, for example, that it's benefited a few elite black elite, as an example, and we've seen the deepening of poverty in the same time in the country? There's a policy that
yes, of course.
What's your view on that?
I think that that would be a criticism of the practitioner. They can be
of the implementation.
Yes, they can be a bad doctor, but that doesn't necessarily mean that medicine in and of itself is bad. I think that the ANC execution hasn't been excellent, but I think the principle of saying that we need to remove the knife that was put into the back of black people, of colored people, by apartheid policies to address the structural injustices which continue. I don't think that's fundamentally wrong, and I don't think that it's fair or correct to say it's discrimination. I think it's part of the problem when you characterize it like that and talk to your 300,000 members or however many Afriforum represents and say, let's oppose this, let's oppose land reform, let's oppose all of these policies as part of saying it's discrimination.
Yeah, and many people would argue that land is also a big issue in terms of social cohesion.
Firstly, I want to just use the opportunity to respond to what has been said, because I think it's very important. Within the racial group, inequality has increased to a point that it is historically has never before seen, and that's the thing. And I want to, because Mr. Jamie said that racial discrimination is not
Mighti,
in principle wrong.
Jamie
it only
Mighti,
depends on the target.
Sorry,
and I just wanted to say. Yes, I just wanted to quickly say, call me controversial, but I think racially discriminatory laws in principle are wrong, and that is why we are getting a lot of these unintended consequences, as we saw earlier. Where we fail is that, firstly, we have a government that has miserably failed in regards to lifting millions out of poverty in this country, a government that would rather spend 350 million to give gifts and donations to their friends in Cuba, a government that would rather spend billions, as it's been revealed, on extravagant dinners and salaries, and rather 22 million on a flag. And then when they are challenged on this wasteful and expenditure and on corruption, they laugh about it. The millions of South Africans are suffering because they can't afford food, because the prices are going up, petrol prices are out of control, unemployment is at levels never before seen. That is the real problem. But the problem when it comes to social cohesion is the fact that the politicians and the politically connected elite in this country want to make it seem as if race relations are horrible, and want to make it seem as if racism is the biggest problem in this country, when it is not. But they want to do that. You want to know why? They want to do that because of the masses of this country that are impoverished and unemployed. Don't blame white people. They will start looking at those that have exploited them and that have been corrupt at their expense, and those people will then know what will be done to them. That is the problem. That's why social cohesion problems are arising in South Africa, because the politically connected elite and politicians of this country want to make racism the biggest problem, and want to make as if race relations are horrible. That is not true. If you talk to any person on the street, if you talk to regular South Africans, they will tell you their biggest issues are unemployment, their biggest issues are getting education for their children, and their biggest issues is putting food on the table.
Okay.
That is the big problem, and we can't solve that if we focus on problems that are not the primary issue.
Yeah, I have a different view in terms of racism is not a problem, because it's still a problem. But it might not be as big.
No, I didn't say it's not a problem. I said it is not the biggest problem, just to be clear.
Okay, fine. I take your point. But anyway, Mr. Mighti, your view?
Three reasons why we're not having social cohesion. Number one, to have it, you need to have good faith intent on all of the parties. And some of the parties are participating in the conversations around social cohesion in bad faith. And that also requires meaningful reconciliation. Reconciliation means that you have to be willing and actually take part in the activities of sharing space, resources, and opportunities. And that sometimes speaks to policy. You have to be willing to share land, your workspaces, and access to opportunities. And also, meaningful reconciliation requires that you have proper narratives. When you have people saying that if you ask me to share, you're discriminating against me from something that I've been benefiting the whole time. If I'm the only person drinking water at the tap in a river, and then in a village, and then you come and say, let other people drink, and then I say, why are you discriminating against me? I've always been drinking this water. Surely
I've always
you
been
can
drinking this water alone.
Yes.
Now you're bringing other people.
Yes, and now you're discriminating against me. We're not discriminating against you by saying share spaces, share resources and opportunities.
This debate, even having watched it again and being in different skirmishes with Afriforum, in other platforms, some thoughts. Number one, his idea that we do not need any laws which look at black people as a racial group because primarily that is the way that apartheid looked at people and their diverse tribes is a misunderstanding of the objective of affirmative action. Yes, they are different tribes, Zulu, Xhosa, Spedi, you name it, Sotho, you name it. But what apartheid did as a policy was that it discriminated against black people as a group. And in order to reverse the impacts of that discrimination, you cannot split people up into Zulus, etc., etc. You have to deal and correct the issue the way that it was done. It's like if someone breaks down a door is made of different components, right? It's made of handles, it's made of the screws, and then there's the wood, etc. But if the whole door is broken down, when you go buy a new one at Builder's Warehouse or whatever, you buy the door. You don't buy the components, you buy the door. Then that's the first point. Second point is his argument that, there are rich black people in South Africa. There are people who have benefited, who go to elite schools. That argument is arguing the exception, right? Whenever there are examples that are given, an example can be typical or it can be an exception. An exception does not prove the norm or the rule. It is by definition an exception outside the general parameters of the thing that we are considering. So he then argues because exceptions exist, you don't need to have affirmative action policies. This is not correct. And also shows almost either he's over-focused on these people or that he doesn't understand the statistical realities of South Africa. South Africa remains one of the most deeply divided countries in terms of economic opportunities. It remains one of the countries where black people are in the main suffering from poverty, extreme poverty, and even if you look at poverty on its upper limit definitions, a lot of South Africans are living in poverty still. So just because the children of Cyril Ramaphosa are billionaires or are going to inherit billions doesn't mean that every black South African child is going to be, in that economic opportunity, right? He doesn't recognize that South Africa remains deeply unequal because of the decision that were made, between, I think, from the time when the Glenn Gray Act started, right? These decisions, which then led up to apartheid, all of these decisions continue to affect South Africans. The Glenn Gray Act was the first act which dispossessed black people of land ownership. This was an act that was passed by Cecil John Rhodes in 1894, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Then, after that, you had the Natives Land Act of 1913, which continued the deprivation of land. Then you had the Group Areas Act. Then there's another act I want to reference, which has had a long-lasting impact. That was the Bantu Education Act of 1963. Hendrik Verwoerd said that, black people had no place learning mathematics, for instance. And he then systematically created an unequal education system. When you are trying to correct for these types of policies, you have to take corrective measures for the whole group. And that is the purpose of affirmative action. Because even though it's true that the ANC has failed to do a lot of good governance, even though it's true that corruption has really set back South Africa in immeasurable ways, it is also true that you still need to deal with the consequences of the Glenn Gray Act, the Bantu Education Act, the Native Land Act, the Group Areas Act, because those inequalities still persist, right? Those inequalities still persist. And that's where he misses it. If you have a broken leg, right, and appendicitis when you come to the hospital, we are not going to just treat your broken leg and leave the appendicitis, because the appendicitis can kill you. So you actually need to treat both. They're not mutually exclusive, right? So in saying that there's corruption, in saying that, ANC failed, even in saying that the ANC failed to deliver BEE in the right way, that's not an argument for not doing affirmative action the right way in and of itself. I don't know. What do you guys think about the debate? Do you think that he was arguing genuinely? Do you think that he gets what people are trying to do? You can, if the playing field is not level, you cannot attack those who are trying to say, let's make the playing field level. The playing field was rendered unlevel by 100 years of oppressive policies, pre-apartheid and during apartheid. Those have to be corrected. They didn't just go away because 1994 happened. They do have to be corrected. You have to level the playing field so that you can have equity, so that you can have equality of opportunity. You need both equity and equality of opportunity. What do you think? Let's have a conversation.